Hello, everyone. Today we will be exploring yet another situation that is really upsetting. Please stay active and subscribe and hit the bell icon if you would like to support my channel. I would greatly appreciate of your assistance. Let's start the story. You return home after a lifetime of serving your country, protecting it, and making innumerable sacrifices to start a family that you will love, trust, and treasure for more than 50 years. But what if you found out it was all a lie when you were 80 years old? What would happen if the kids you thought were yours weren't? A revered member of his community, a dedicated father, and a distinguished soldier, Leonard Harris, underwent what appeared to be a benign DNA test, intended merely to identify his origins. Rather, it revealed a reality so terrible that it destroyed everything he had ever known. However, this was not merely a tale of long-held secrets. Nobody could have foreseen the series of events that followed the revelation, which resulted in a confrontation, a shooting, and a murder that rocked the family as a whole. When the cornerstone of your life falls apart, how far would you go? Join us as we explore a startling tale of murder, treachery, and deceit that reveals the perilous nature of concealed facts buried deep within the tranquil southern countryside. South was a small, peaceful town where life moved at a slower pace. The streets were lined with weathered houses, their porches whispering with the echoes of generations past. Neighbors greeted each other with nods and warm smiles, and in a place like this, everyone knew someone who knew you. It was the kind of town where families planted deep roots, and Leonard Harris's family was no exception. For more than 50 years, Leonard Harris, a proud 80-year-old African-American veteran, had built his life in this tight-knit community. A man of honor, discipline, and quiet strength, he was respected by all who knew him. Leonard had served his country with pride, returning home after years in uniform to embrace the American dream, a home, a wife, and children who filled his life with love and purpose. Leonard was never one for many words. Instead, he spoke through his actions. Whether it was fixing a neighbor's broken fence, offering wisdom to younger men, or leading prayers at church, he carried himself with dignity and commanded respect without ever demanding it. But above all else, Leonard's greatest pride was his family. His children were his legacy, his purpose, his heart walking outside his body. In the evenings, he would sit on his porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, a quiet smile on his face as he saw his grown children come and go. To Leonard, family was everything. On the surface, the Harris family seemed picture perfect for children raised in a home filled with discipline, love, and the comforting aroma of Evelyn Harris's home-cooked meals. Evelyn, Leonard's wife of 50 years, was the glue that held their world together. With her gentle spirit and steady hands, she transformed their house into a home, teaching their children to cherish family above all else. To the neighbors, Evelyn was a Blasinga woman, whose unwavering faith and kindness could turn even the darkest days into something hopeful. Their children were Leonard's pride and joy, the very foundation of his life. But soon, he would discover a truth so shattering that it would unravel everything he had ever believed in. At 48, Darnell Harris was the mirror image of his father, strong, steady, and hardworking. He was the first to step up when something needed to be done. Growing up, Darnell had spent countless hours by Leonard's side, fixing cars and tending the yard. He was the right-hand man of the family, the one Leonard trusted the most. Monique Harris, at 46, was the nurturer of the family. A devoted mother herself, she held tightly to the traditions Evelyn had instilled in her. Monique was the glue that kept everyone connected, organizing family dinners, making phone calls to check in, and ensuring the holidays were always celebrated together. To Monique, family was sacred, and she carried that belief in everything she did. Tyrone Harris, the 43-year-old middle son, was the light of the family. Charismatic and successful, his infectious smile had a way of lifting any mood. He was always the one to break tension with a joke, to bring laughter when life felt heavy. People were drawn to him, and though Leonard wasn't one to express emotions easily, he took quiet pride in Tyrone's ability to stand out and carve his own path. Kesha Harris, the youngest at 38, was the free spirit of the family and Leonard's undeniable favorite. As his baby girl, Kesha could do no wrong in his eyes. She was creative, full of life, and fiercely loyal to her father. Despite her adventurous nature, she always found time to sit with Leonard on the porch, laughing and reminiscing about the past. Together, they were a family admired by those who knew them, a symbol of unity, resilience, and tradition. On Leonard's 80th birthday, the family gathered to celebrate. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the mouth-watering aroma of Evelyn's famous collard greens simmering in the kitchen. As always, Kesha had brought the most thoughtful gift. With eyes sparkling with excitement, she handed Leonard a small, unassuming box. "Daddy," she grinned, "I thought it'd be fun to learn more about our family history. You know, where we come from." Leonard chuckled, shaking his head. "Girl, I already know where I come from right here." Still, he accepted the gift, smiling as his children encouraged him to give it a try. To Leonard, it was just a novelty, a light-hearted gesture from the daughter he adored. He didn't think much of it. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Leonard sat in his armchair, the DNA kit in his hands. The directions were simple enough: swab your cheek, seal the sample, and mail it off. With careful hands, he followed the instructions, never imagining that this small, innocent test would change everything. Leonard couldn't help but marvel at how much the world had changed. Technology could now uncover truths that past generations never even dreamed of. A close-up shot shows Leonard's aged yet steady hands, carefully placing the swab into the small container. Another slow, deliberate shot captures the package dropping into a mailbox. Under the soft glow of the setting sun, a seemingly harmless moment that held the power to change everything. Weeks passed, and the DNA test was quickly forgotten as life carried on. Leonard settled back into his familiar routines: morning walks, Sunday church services, and quiet afternoons on his porch. Evelyn hummed as she prepared dinner. Their children called or stopped by whenever they could, and everything remained as it had always been: peaceful, simple, familiar. Or so Leonard thought. What had started as an innocent birthday gift, a casual curiosity about his heritage, would soon unravel the very foundation of his life, exposing secrets so deeply buried that not even Evelyn could have foreseen what was coming. Leonard Harris had always believed life followed a rhythm, shaped by routine, family, and faith. At 80 years old, his days were steady and full of purpose: morning walks, meals with Evelyn, and afternoons spent helping at the church. A veteran, a father, a devoted husband, and a pillar of his community, Leonard was admired and respected. The day the DNA results arrived started like any other. The envelope had been sitting unopened on the kitchen counter for days, buried beneath church flyers and Evelyn's handwritten grocery lists. Leonard hadn't been avoiding ETH, and Evelyn had been busy with preparations for their church's annual charity event. But tonight was different. The house was quiet. Evelyn was visiting Monique, leaving Leonard alone with nothing but his thoughts and that unopened envelope. Curiosity got the better of him. Leonard sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, and tore open the envelope, expecting to discover more about his ancestry. But what he found instead was unimaginable. At first, the report made little sense. The medical jargon was technical and impersonal. But then, his eyes landed on a section labeled "Immediate Family Matches." His own name was there. But where his children's names should have been, there was nothing. 4 names: Darnell, Monique, Tyrone, and Kesha. Each one listed with a glaring 0% genetic match. Leonard froze. His heart pounded as he read and reread the report, his hands trembling. His 4 children, the ones he had loved, raised, and called his own, were not biologically his. For hours, he sat at the table in silence. The papers spread out before him like a damning accusation. His stomach twisted as the weight of the revelation sank in. His world, everything he had built, had just shattered. But he needed to hear it from Evelyn. She had to explain this. There had to be an answer. The next evening, Evelyn returned home from a church meeting, unsuspecting of what awaited her. Leonard was sitting in the living room, the DNA report in his lap. She smiled as she set her purse down. "You're up late," she remarked casually, unaware of the storm brewing in the air. Leonard's voice was low but firm. "Evelyn." Something in his tone made her pause. She looked at him, brows furrowing. "Sit down." Slowly, she lowered herself into the armchair across from him. Confusion etched across her face. Leonard didn't look at her at first. He simply held out the paper. "What's this?" Evelyn asked, glancing at the document. "Read it." His tone was colder than she had ever heard before. Evelyn's eyes scanned the page. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, then to something unreadable. Her lips pressed together tightly as she shook her head, shoving the paper back toward him. "Leonard, this doesn't mean anything. These tests, they're not always accurate. I've heard of things like this before. It has to be a mistake." Leonard's gaze hardened. "A mistake?" His voice was low, but his words carried the weight of betrayal. "That paper says I'm not their father, Evelyn. Not one of them." Evelyn waved a hand dismissively, refusing to meet his eyes. "Those companies get things wrong all the time. You're letting this nonsense get in your head. You know how much you mean to this family, Leonard. This changes nothing." Leonard's hand slammed down on the coffee table, making Evelyn jump. "Don't lie to me," he barked. "Don't you dare lie to me again, Evelyn. I need the truth." "I am telling the truth," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "Those children are yours. You raised them, Leonard. You are their father. Blood doesn't change that." Leonard stood pacing the room, the paper crumpled in his trembling hands. He didn't know what was worse, what the report revealed, or Evelyn's refusal to acknowledge it. Finally, he stopped, his voice quieter, but filled with raw emotion. "You know what? I don't need you to admit it. I'll show Darnell." The following day, Leonard called Darnell over, telling him he needed help with some yard work. As always, Darnell showed up without hesitation, strong, steady, and reliable, just as he had always been. At 48, he was the spitting image of Leonard, or so Leonard had always believed. Leonard watched as Darnell bent down to pull weeds from the flower bed, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. "Darnell," Leonard finally said, his voice tight, "come inside. I need to talk to you." Inside the house, Leonard sat Darnell down at the kitchen table, the same table where he had first opened the DNA results. Without a word, he placed the crumpled report in front of his son. "What's this?" Darnell asked, frowning as he unfolded the paper. "Just read it," Leonard said, his eyes never leaving Darnell's face. Darnell's gaze moved quickly over the document, his expression shifting as he processed the words. His fingers tightened around the edges of the paper. "What is this supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice cautious. Leonard's jaw clenched. "It means you're not my son. None of you are." His voice wavered. "That test says I'm not your father, Darnell." Darnell stared at him. Confusion and disbelief etched across his face. "What are you talking about?" He let out a nervous chuckle, shaking his head. "That doesn't make sense, Dad. Of course you're my father." Leonard shook his head, the pain in his voice unmistakable. "Look at the paper. It's right there, 0%. I'm not your father, Darnell. I'm not anybody's father." Darnell's expression hardened as he pushed the paper back across the table. Where did this even come from? One of those DNA kits? His voice dripped with frustration. "You're telling me you believe this over 48 years of being my dad? This is ridiculous." Leonard's hand slammed against the table, the sharp sound echoing through the kitchen. "Don't you think I want this to be wrong?" His voice cracked. "Don't you think I wish this was a mistake?" He exhaled shakily, his next words barely a whisper. "But I can't deny what's right in front of me. Someone's been lying to me for 50 years. Darnell abruptly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't care what that paper says." His voice was firm, his eyes filled with something between anger and heartbreak. "You are my father, and you always will be. I don't want to hear any more of this nonsense." Leonard watched his son storm out, the door slamming behind him. For a moment, silence filled the house. But inside Leonard's mind, there was only chaos. Evelyn had denied it. Now Darnell refused to believe it. But the truth on that paper wasn't going away no matter how much anyone wanted to ignore it. And deep down, Leonard knew this was only the beginning. A family on the brink. The house was no longer a home, it was a battlefield. Leonard Harris, the 80-year-old patriarch, sat in the dimly lit living room, clutching the DNA results that had shattered his world. He had already shared the devastating truth with Darnell, his eldest, because he couldn't carry the weight of it alone. Darnell, in shock, had tried to stay strong for himself, for Leonard, but the truth had shaken him to his core. "Don't tell your siblings just yet," Leonard had warned, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Kesha was pregnant. He couldn't destroy her world, not yet. But he knew one thing for certain. The truth, no matter how painful, had a way of coming out. And when it did, there was no telling how much more damage it would do. The breaking point. The name Raymond Carter had been circling in Leonard's mind for days. A family friend. A trusted man. A face he had welcomed into his home for decades. The thought of Raymond sitting at his dinner table, laughing with his children made Leonard's stomach twist. Was he one of them? One of the men Evelyn had betrayed him with? Leonard couldn't let it go. He needed answers. That evening, under the weight of restless anger, Leonard climbed into his old pickup truck and drove across town. The streets were quiet, bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. As he neared Raymond's house, his grip tightened on the steering wheel. Raymond lived alone now. His wife had passed years ago, and his children had moved away. The house was still the only sign of life was the flickering blue glow of a television through the window. Leonard parked outside and sat in the truck for a long moment, his heart pounding. Then, without hesitation, he climbed out, walked up the porch steps, and knocked loud and firm. After a few moments, the door creaked open. Raymond stood there, a puzzled look crossing his face. "Leonard?" His voice was laced with surprise. "It's late, brother. Everything all right?" Leonard didn't answer at first. His eyes scanned Raymond's face, searching for something, anything, that would confirm his suspicions. Finally, he spoke. "We need to talk." Raymond hesitated, then stepped aside, motioning Leonard in. A lifetime of lies. Inside, the living room was cluttered but warm, filled with old pictures, books, and the familiar scent of worn leather and aftershave. Leonard had been in this house countless times, but tonight it felt different. Raymond sat down in his recliner, watching Leonard closely. "What's this about?" Leonard reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled DNA report, tossing it onto the coffee table between them. Raymond frowned, picking it up. He read the paper slowly, his expression darkening. Leonard's voice was low, steady, but dangerous. "Tell me the truth, Raymond." Raymond let out a slow sigh, placing the paper down. His hands rested on his knees, and for the first time he looked guilty. "Leonard, I don't know what to say." Leonard's jaw clenched. "Just say it." Raymond looked down, rubbing his hands together. "It was a long time ago," he muttered. "I never meant to hurt you, brother." The words hit Leonard like a sledgehammer. His breath caught in his throat. "So it's true," he whispered. "You slept with my wife." Raymond closed his eyes for a moment before nodding. Leonard felt his world tilt. His hands balled into fists. He had suspected it. He had known it. But hearing it from Raymond's mouth made it real. Rage boiled inside him. Decades of trust and friendship disintegrating in an instant. "You sat at my table," Leonard said through clenched teeth. "You smiled in my face while raising kids that might have been yours." Raymond swallowed hard. "I don't know if they're mine, Leonard." "I never did." The confession did nothing to calm Leonard. His body trembled with anger, betrayal flooding every fiber of his being. "You don't know?" Leonard let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "How many times, Raymond? How long?" Raymond hesitated, then sighed. "A few years." Leonard lunged. In an instant, he was on Raymond, fists swinging, years of pain and fury exploding out of him. Raymond struggled under Leonard's weight, trying to block the blows, but Leonard was relentless. "You took everything from me?" Leonard roared, his fist slamming into Raymond's face. Blood spattered across the coffee table. Raymond groaned, trying to push Leonard off. "Leonard, stop," he gasped. But Leonard couldn't stop. The betrayal, the humiliation, the wasted years, all consumed him. Raymond's body went limp beneath him, but Leonard barely noticed. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking. He stumbled back, his vision blurring. Raymond lay still. Blood pooled beneath his head. Leonard staggered, staring at what he had done. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock. He hadn't meant to kill him. But Raymond wasn't moving. A life unraveled. Leonard's hands were stained red as he stumbled out of the house, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a crushing force. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. He climbed into his truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced. What had he done? Raymond had been a liar, a traitor. But had he deserved this? Leonard drove, the world outside blurring. He didn't know where he was going. He just drove. At some point, he ended up at the church, the place he had always turned to for guidance, for peace. He parked and sat there, staring at the darkened building. For 50 years he had been a man of faith, a man of honor, a man who believed in family above all else. Now, he was nothing. A liar, a fool, a murderer. Tears burned his eyes as he lowered his head onto the steering wheel. Some sins could never be forgiven. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Leonard Harris knew his life would never be the same again. Leonard had always considered Raymond a brother, a man he could trust without question. But now, every shared laugh, every handshake, every meal felt like a betrayal. The truth was, Raymond was the father of one of his children. That knowledge corroded Leonard's mind like rust on metal, eating away at his sense of reality. The betrayal didn't just come from Evelyn. It came from a man he once called a friend. That evening, Leonard was invited to dinner at Raymond's house. Evelyn had insisted, saying it was time to heal, to put the past behind them. "We can't live like this, Leonard," she had pleaded. "Let's sit down as a family. Raymond wants to make things right." Leonard agreed, but something about his silence was different this time, cold, unreadable, like a storm brewing beneath the surface. When he arrived, the tension was already thick. The small living room was packed with family members. Monique, Tyrone, and Keisha were there, attempting to maintain a strained conversation. Raymond greeted Leonard with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, his handshake weak and hesitant. In the kitchen, Evelyn busied herself alongside Raymond's wife, her nervous hands fumbling with the dishes. Leonard sat quietly in the corner, watching. He barely spoke, his gaze flickering between Raymond and Evelyn, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Every word they exchanged felt like a knife, digging deeper into wounds he had tried to ignore. Finally, Leonard stood. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Raymond." His voice was low but sharp. "We need to talk. Outside." Raymond shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the others. "Leonard, now's not the time. Let's just eat, sit down." Leonard took a step closer, his towering presence casting a shadow over Raymond. "Outside. Now." Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. "Leonard, stop this. You're making a scene." Leonard turned his head slowly, his eyes like ice. "We settle this now, Evelyn. Once and for all." Raymond sighed in resignation, then gestured toward the back door. "Fine. Let's talk outside." The back porch was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the kitchen window. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rain on the horizon. The air felt heavy with the scent of rain, and the dark clouds above seemed to warn of an impending storm. Leonard followed Raymond outside, his steps slow and deliberate. "What's this about?" Raymond asked, attempting to maintain calm despite his voice quivering slightly. Leonard didn't answer immediately. He simply stared at Raymond, his fists clenched at his sides. Finally, his voice broke through, rough and strained. "You think I don't know?" Raymond stiffened, shifting nervously, glancing toward the house. "You think I don't know what you did to me? What you did to my family?" Raymond's eyes flickered to the ground. "We've been friends for a long time, Leonard." Leonard's voice was sharp like a knife cutting through the air. "Friends?" He scoffed bitterly. "You slept with my wife. You ate in my house, sat at my table, smiled at my kids, knowing one or two of them might be yours. And you call that friendship?" Raymond raised his hands defensively, his voice trembling. "Listen, Leonard, it was a mistake, a long time ago. I never wanted it to come out like this." Leonard's breath became heavier, each exhale more labored than the last. His hand moved to his coat pocket, where the weight of his gun grounded him. "You took everything from me, Raymond. Everything." Raymond took a step back, his voice panicked. "Don't do something you'll regret, Leonard." At that moment, Evelyn stepped onto the porch, her voice high-pitched. "Leonard, stop this. Please go back inside." Leonard turned his gaze toward her, his expression cold and unyielding. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, Evelyn." Her eyes darted to the gun Leonard now held, her voice desperate. "Leonard, please don't." Raymond paled, stumbling back. "Put the gun down, this isn't you, man." But Leonard's focus was elsewhere. The sound of the gun being cocked echoed across the porch, loud and foreboding. In that split second, the anger, humiliation, and betrayal he'd felt for so long exploded in a single, violent act. The shot rang out like thunder, and Raymond staggered, clutching his chest before collapsing. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the wooden floor. Evelyn screamed, her cries slicing through the night. "Leonard, no! What have you done?" Leonard's breathing slowed as he turned toward Evelyn. His hand still gripped the gun, and his eyes were filled with something unreadable. "You did this, Evelyn. You made me this way." Evelyn scrambled back, her hands raised in surrender. "Leonard, please." But Leonard raised the gun again. Evelyn's sobs filled the air, but the second shot silenced them all. The house fell silent. The only sound, the faint crackle of the rain as the storm broke. Leonard stood still, his face devoid of expression, the gun heavy in his hand. Slowly, he tucked the pistol into his coat, his blood-stained hands leaving a trail behind him. He walked back through the house, his family frozen in shock. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. But Leonard didn't speak. He simply opened the front door, stepped into the rain, and got into his car. Leonard drove through the rain-soaked streets in silence. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers was the only sound. He didn't know how long he'd been driving until he pulled up to his eldest son Darnell's house. Darnell opened the door, his eyes falling on his father's soaked, blood-stained appearance. "Daddy, what happened?" Leonard looked at him, his voice calm and even. "Call the police, son. Tell them where I am." Darnell stepped back, his voice shaking. "Daddy, what did you do?" Leonard exhaled slowly. What needed to be done? The police arrived soon after, their flashing lights cutting through the dark night. Leonard stood on the porch, hands raised in surrender as officers cuffed him. Neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief. Did Leonard Harris really just? Leonard didn't respond as they led him to the squad car. He sat quietly in the back, staring out the window as the rain streaked down the glass. In one night, Leonard Harris had destroyed everything he had worked his whole life to build. Decades of trust, faith, and family were wiped away by 2 bullets. Was it a crime of passion? Or was it the final act of a man who had been pushed too far? What happens to a man when everything he's ever believed in his family, his marriage, his legacy turns out to be a lie? For Leonard Harris, the betrayal cut deeper than words could explain. A man who had built his life on honor, loyalty, and sacrifice suddenly found himself staring at the wreckage of everything he had believed in. Was this the act of a broken heart? A man pushed beyond his limits? Or had the truth unearthed something darker inside him? Something buried for decades? Imagine standing in Leonard's shoes, giving everything to your family, your time, your love, your very soul, only to discover the children you raised aren't even yours. The trial of Leonard Harris drew the attention of the entire town. The once respected veteran, church elder, and family man now sat in a cold courtroom, his hands cuffed, his face gaunt and emotionless. The weight of his actions, the murders of his wife, Evelyn, and family friend Raymond hung heavily in the air. The proceedings were swift. Leonard didn't contest the charges. There was no elaborate defense or plea for mercy. He sat silently, listening as the details of his crimes were recounted. The prosecution painted him as a man consumed by rage, while others whispered that he was a man pushed too far, his breaking point buried beneath years of betrayal. When the sentence was handed down, life in prison without the possibility of parole, Leonard barely reacted. He simply nodded, as though he had already accepted his fate. But for his children, the fallout was devastating. In the span of moments, they had lost everything: their mother, their father, and the life they thought they knew. Monique, Tyrone, Darnell, and Keisha sat together in the courtroom, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. They were left to carry the scars of a story they never asked, to be part of a story born of betrayal and secrets. This tragic case forces us to confront a painful truth. Trust, no matter how solid it seems, can shatter in an instant. How fragile is the foundation of a family when it's built on lies? And what is the real price of betrayal when it destroys not just individuals, but entire generations? Leonard Harris's story isn't just about a crime, it's about the breaking of a man who believed he had given everything, only to discover he had nothing at all. What do you think about this case? Was Leonard a man pushed too far, or was there another way out? Could anyone survive such a betrayal without breaking? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more impactful stories. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.